Good morning. My name is Bob Ellertsen, and I've been a member of the First Unitarian Universalist Society in Newton since 1981. Today I'll be discussing the social activism of three men from the 19th century who are memorialized in two of the stained glass windows in our building sanctuary, along with their activist wives and other activists with whom they were closely associated. My thanks go to Kurt Lamb and to Gail Smalley for the help they have given me. The three men are Horace Mann, Cyrus Peirce, and Nathaniel Topliff Allen, prominent activists and also really good friends. They were anti-slavery abolitionists, education reformers, and supporters of women's rights. It should be noted that many activists that were prominent in the 19th century knew similar activists as well. They were connected, and that certainly was the case for these three individuals and the many activists that they were connected with. Before working on this presentation, I did not know a lot of what I'll be talking about today. I wish I had had this information before. I think it would have really enhanced my membership and my experience in the society over the years. And it also would have provided me with a great deal of inspiration. It has provided me with inspiration now, and I hope it will to you too. Here is how the building, completed in 1906, looks today. In the building's sanctuary is a stained glass window dedicated to education, which shows Horace Mann to the right and Cyrus Peirce to the left. It was installed more than 50 years after each of them had died. Horace Mann is known as the father of public school education. He was born in 1796 in Franklin, here in Massachusetts. He died in 1859 in Ohio of typhoid fever. He was one of the 10 signers of the Fusion Charter in 1848. There is a wonderful bas relief of Horace Mann on a hallway outside of the parish hall, and I think it's worth noticing the next time you are in that location. Although Horace Mann is best known as a highly influential educational reformer, he was deeply involved as an anti-slavery abolitionist and as a proponent of women's rights. Here is a daguerreotype photo by the famous photographer Matthew Brady. Mann's success as an educator tends to overshadow his success as an elected politician. He was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives in 1827 and served for several terms. Then the Massachusetts Senate from 1836 to 1837, where he became its president. And then to the United States House of Representatives. He also ran unsuccessfully for the governor of Massachusetts in 1852. There's a postage stamp with his image from 1940. Several books have been written about Horace Mann, and you can purchase some of them online. Here is one. Here's a biography. Mann was a really prolific writer, and he wrote several books. Here's one, and here's another. Forgive me for this PowerPoint type slide with bullet points. It will be the only one, honest. But these principles guided Mann's life as an educator and also strongly influenced Peirce and Allen. Mann's influence has been so great that more than 50 schools are named after him, including one in Newton. When former U.S. President and later a member of the United States House of Representatives, John Quincy Adams, a fervent anti-slavery abolitionist and a Unitarian, died, Mann ran for a seat and was elected. Mann's first speech was a passionate one about anti-slavery. Mann is often quoted. One of his most famous is, "Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity." It became the motto of Antioch College, one of the first colleges to have coeducational classes of men and women, where he served as its first president from 1852 until he died in 1859. A few years after Mann died, a bronze statue of him was commissioned for the grounds of the Massachusetts State House, where it stands today next to the statue of Daniel Webster. One of the first notable American woman sculptors, Emma Stebbins, created the statue in 1865. Emma Stebbins had a 20-year openly lived relationship with the then famous actress Charlotte Cushman. They exchanged informal vows and considered themselves married and lived as such from 1857 until one of them died in 1876. Mary Tyler Peabody, 1806 to 1887, married Horace Mann in 1843. She was a prominent activist in women's suffrage, world peace, and Native American rights. Mary was one of the three famous Peabody sisters from Salem, Massachusetts, each associated with Unitarian churches, each highly accomplished in her own right, and two of whom married famous men. Elizabeth Peabody is known as the founder of the kindergarten movement in America. Sophia was a painter and writer who married Nathaniel Hawthorne after his romance with Elizabeth ended. Mary Tyler Peabody Mann was a teacher, author, and mother. The Peabody sisters are quite famous. Their three brothers are not, but they are, and here is a book about them. Here's Sophia's husband, Nathaniel Hawthorne. In his novels and short stories, female characters are fully realized more so than the male characters who merely orbit about them. Nathaniel Hawthorne is not considered to be a Unitarian. His wife was, but he was kind of distant from the Unitarian churches of that era, even though a lot of the philosophy in his novels was consistent with what many Unitarians were believing at that time. He still is famous to this day, and in 1983 there was a postage stamp in his honor. There are several statues of Nathaniel Hawthorne in the United States, and here is one that's pretty famous in Salem, Massachusetts. When Horace and Mary Mann married, they had a dual honeymoon to Europe with their friends and fellow Unitarians Salem Gridley Howe, in this photo, and his new wife, Julia Ward Howe. Julia gave birth to a baby during the honeymoon trip. Samuel was an American physician, abolitionist, and advocate for the education of the blind. He organized and was the first director of the Perkins Institution for the Blind. Julia Ward Howe, 1819 to 1910, was an author and a poet known for writing the Battle Hymn of the Republic and also the original 1870 pacifist Mother's Day Proclamation. She was also an advocate for abolition and an advocate and activist for women's suffrage. Julia was the first woman to be elected to the American Academy of Arts and Letters. There's a postage stamp for her too. Cyrus Peirce is known as the father of teacher education in the United States, and he was the first moderator of the First Unitarian Society in Newton in 1848. He was born in 1790 in Waltham, Massachusetts, and died in 1860 in West Newton at the age of 69. He was an educator and a Unitarian minister, and was an activist in the abolition movement, the peace movement, and the women's suffrage movement. Unitarianism provided the principles by which he lived. He was the first president of what is now Framingham State University. His School for Teachers Education was formerly on the grounds of the current site of the First Unitarian Universalist Society in Newton. His memoir can be purchased online. There is a wonderful biography about him. As a teacher, he closed each class with the call to live to the truth, which is also the university's motto to this day. Peirce's wife, Harriet Coffin, was born in 1794 in Nantucket, and she died in about 1880. She was a Quaker, an anti-slavery abolitionist, a suffragette, a champion for the parity in teacher salaries for men and women. After Peirce's death in 1860, she returned to Nantucket and connected with people like Frederick Douglass and his wife. Douglass visited the island 5 times. In 1840, the first class of 25 women graduated from the normal school where Peirce was president. 2 of these graduates included Mary Swift Lamson, a teacher in the newly conceived Education of the Blind and Deaf, the Perkins School for the Blind, as well as co-founder of the YWCA in Boston. She is the woman on the right of this photo. The other 2 taught at the School for the Blind, too. Another early graduate of Peirce's school was Rebecca Pennell Dean, and at Antioch College she became the first female college professor in the United States in 1853. In 1843, Mary Elizabeth Miles Bibb became the first African-American student to graduate from Peirce's normal school. She was also the first African-American graduate of any public teachers' college in America. She was an ardent abolitionist, often working with her husband, Henry Bibb, who escaped from enslavement and became an abolitionist. They moved to Canada. There they managed the Refugee Home Society for people escaping from slavery, which they helped found in 1851. They were designated National Historic Persons in Canada in 2002. Also, she is considered by some to be the first female black journalist in Canada. Before his normal school, Peirce opened a school for young ladies in Nantucket in 1831, and one of his first students was 14-year-old Maria Mitchell, and she would become an American astronomer, educator, librarian, and naturalist. So she attended his school until age 16, then she was his teaching assistant. Then she opened her own school in Nantucket, and she allowed non-white children to attend her school, a controversial move on the island as the local public school was still segregated. At age 25, she became a Unitarian, and in 1847, at age 29, she discovered a comet, now known as Miss Mitchell's Comet. She won a gold medal prize for her discovery. She also became the first person, male or female, to record a comet sighting in America. A crater on the moon was named in her honor. She was also the first woman elected Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Here she is with her telescope and one of her students. Her telescope now resides in the Smithsonian Institution. Here is a photo with some of her female students. Teaching at Vassar, she learned her salary was less than that of younger male professors and insisted on a salary increase, and she got it. She also became involved in the anti-slavery movement by refusing to wear clothes made of southern cotton. She became involved in many social issues as a professor, particularly women's suffrage and education for women. Mitchell stayed in close contact with Peirce and his wife Harriet, and they knew many of the same people. In her home in Nantucket, she entertained a number of prominent active academics at that time, such as Ralph Waldo Emerson, Herman Melville, and Frederick Douglass, the father of the American Civil Rights Movement. She was also well connected with Sojourner Truth, who was the first black woman to win a custody case against a white man, and had many other accomplishments in her long and storied career. A stamp was issued honoring Sojourner Truth in 1986. There are many statues of Sojourner Truth, and here's one in Battle Creek, Michigan. Maria Mitchell was also connected to Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the chief philosopher of the women's rights and suffragette movements. Nathaniel Topliff Allen was the founder and principal of the West Newton English and Classical School, often referred to as the Allen School. Here is a photo of the huge Allen window from the inside. Because it is in the rear of the sanctuary, most people on Sunday services are unaware of it. But the minister in the pulpit gets a direct view. Former Minister Jerry Crick, a 20th century activist for sure, said it gave him great inspiration each Sunday morning. Here is a closer view of the center panel, the peace panel, at the top of the window. Note that the window overall is full of religious symbolism, with angels everywhere and representations of biblical stories to go with each of the window's themes. You can get up close to the Allen window in the loft at the rear of the sanctuary and learn about it and Allen. It is worth doing and kind of cool, I think. You can get up close to the Allen window in the loft in the rear of the sanctuary and learn more about it and about Allen. It is really worth it going up there. It's kind of cool, I think. There is a small panel concerning the dedication to this man. There's also this plaque near the bottom of the window telling more about why it's there. Allen was born in 1823 and died in 1903. He was a progressive reformer, active in the anti-slavery movement, the Underground Railroad, women's suffrage, temperance, and the education of women and African Americans. He was the director of the American Peace Society, president of the West Newton Anti-Slavery Society, and president of the Newton Women's Suffrage Association. Allen was married in 1853 to Carolyn Swift of Nantucket. She's seated next to him in this family photo. She studied under Cyrus Burse at the normal school, and she worked in the Allen School from 1854 to 1903, almost 50 years. She was active in the women's suffrage movement and an advocate for women's educational reform. She also co-founded the West Newton Women's Educational Club, was a member of the New England Women's Club of Boston, along with Carolyn Severance. A published essayist, she died in 1915 in West Newton at the age of 84. Caroline Severance, Caroline Swift Allen's friend, was an American abolitionist, suffragist, and founder of women's clubs. Severance had many firsts. She was the first woman to give a lecture in the Boston Lyceum Association. She established the first women's club in the United States, the New England Women's Club. Along with other New England suffragists, she founded the American Women's Suffrage Association, and she was a Unitarian. The Allen School started in 1854. Here's a photo with some students. Here's how the buildings look today. In 1854, one Anthony Burns had escaped from slavery but was captured in Boston and was to be returned to enslavement in Virginia under the then active Fugitive Slave Act. In that year, 1854, with his school students, Allen attended the rally of 50,000 people in Boston to protest the return. Allen cried out, "Shame!" and was then physically assaulted by a policeman and held in custody for many hours. The kids had to go home alone, but did return safely. Burns was returned to a life of enslavement in 1854, but a few years later, a group of people in New England learned who the man was who owned him, purchased Burns, and brought him back to freedom. Here's a drawing showing the large crowd and showing the substantial number of authorities that had to escort this individual, Anthony Burns, to his ship and back to slavery. Racial diversity and coeducation were features of the Allen School, as shown in this photo. The socially progressive Allen School had students from most states and Europe, Japan, and the Americas. The school achieved several landmarks in educational history, including co-educational high school curricula, North America's first pure kindergarten, and the pioneering of having black youngsters being integrated into the mainstream of American education. Over 50 years of existence, more than 5,000 students attended the Allen School. Notable alumni include Rebecca Lee Crumpler, the first African-American woman to become a physician in the United States. Unfortunately, no credible photo of her exists, and photos and articles about her often instead have a photo of one of 3 other notable African-American women who were active in healthcare and accomplished during the 19th century. Elizabeth Piper Ensley, an African-American suffragist, educator, women's suffragette, and activist. Tanitaro Magata, Japanese lawyer, student from the Allen School, he became the Minister of Education in Japan. Sarah Fuller, educator of the deaf, who worked with Alexander Graham Bell. In 1869, she became the principal of the newly formed Boston School of Deaf Mutes. She was present when the first message was sent over the telephone. In 1890, she applied Bell's method in giving the first speech lessons to Helen Keller, who could neither see or hear. She helped found the American Association to promote the teaching of speech to the deaf in 1890, and she later became director of that organization. Mary Ann Green, a lawyer, was the first American woman to address the World's Congress on Jurisprudence and Law Reform. She was the first woman to publish in the American Law Review in 1890, and the first woman to argue a case before the Rhode Island Supreme Court in 1907. She was the second woman to be admitted to the Massachusetts bar. Nathaniel Allen was very close with William Lloyd Garrison, the famous American abolitionist and journalist, and who was the editor of the anti-slavery newspaper, The Liberator. Garrison is best known for his widely read anti-slavery newspaper, The Liberator, which he founded in 1831 and published until the end of the Civil War. Garrison later became a prominent voice for women's suffrage. There's a statue of him on Commonwealth Avenue. Allen was also very close with Charles Sumner, a Unitarian who represented Massachusetts in the United States Senate. Sumner was a passionate abolitionist, and because of this, in 1856, Representative Preston Brooks of South Carolina confronted Sumner as he sat writing at his desk. Brooks beat Sumner into unconsciousness until his cane broke. The remains of the cane can be viewed in the Massachusetts State House. After the war, he became a champion of civil rights, especially for blacks to vote and hold office. Here's a statue of Sumner in Cambridge. Lucy Stone was another colleague. She was an order abolitionist and suffragist, a Unitarian. In 1847, Stone became the first woman from Massachusetts to earn a college degree. She spoke out for women's rights and against slavery. She used her birth name after marriage, contrary to the custom, called the Order and the Morning Star and the heart and soul of the women's rights movement. There's a stamp for her. There was a lot of communication between Nathaniel Allen and Booker T. Washington, who was an American educator, author, orator, and advisor to several presidents of the United States. Between 1890 and 1915, Washington was the dominant figure in the African American community and of the contemporary black elite. His image on a U.S. postage stamp in 1940 was the first for an African American. There's a statue of him at Tuskegee University. Probably the best known of all the activists with whom Nathaniel Allen was in regular contact was Frederick Douglass, the father of the American Civil Rights Movement. Here is a statue of him at our nation's capital. In a letter from Frederick Douglass to Nathaniel Topliff Allen in 1882, Douglass wrote, "I shall never forget the kindness shown to me by the dear Allen family. I am glad to know that the school of which I have so often heard is under your charge." Before I started on this presentation, I knew only a little about these three activists. I did not know of the depth and breadth of their beliefs and their actions. I also did not know of the close connection of the three major areas of their activism. Using today's terminology, they were consistent and passionate champions during their entire adult lives for racial justice, educational justice, and gender justice, all at the same time. I hope that anyone who looks at the lives of these three activists will come away with the same awe and inspiration that I have. Thanks for your attention today. I hope you feel that your time has been well spent.